All right, everybody. Niklas Anzinger. How are you, brother? How are you
Great,
doing?
great, man. How are you?
It's so great, man. Internet is amazing. I literally was telling you the other day how I found you, and it's basically by just following a hashtag network state on LinkedIn, and all of a sudden you came up with your post and with your episode on that subject. So that's just random, but how cool is that?
So here we are.
So, Nicholas, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What are you up to right now? How come you are interested in the network state, and what are you working on?
Sure. My name is Niklas. Originally, I'm from Germany. Right now, I'm nomadic. I'm dividing my time between Honduras, Mexico City, and the United States, together with my wife, who's American. And I'm currently based on the island of Roatan, Honduras, where there's an interesting network state slash startup city. You might talk a bit about the distinctions. That is called Prospera. And I decided to start a VC fund there that's focusing on companies that gain special regulatory advantages through network states, charter cities, wherever they can find better regulatory or legal options. And how this came about was really two trends in my life coming together. Like 2.5 years ago, two things happened. I left a job that I felt I had reached a peak in. I was in a very successful startup as an early employee and VP. I've created a new business line from scratch that led to a Series B valuation, but I felt I wasn't progressing and I had to do my own thing. And second was I met my now wife shortly before the pandemic. We met in New York City and we just really hit it off, but we couldn't see each other. I was in Berlin, she was in New York City, and because the pandemic was happening and all flights were canceled. So we decided we want to do this, right? Sure. So as soon as there's a country that lets us in, we're going to cancel everything we have and go to travel and become nomadic together and create and fulfill our dreams, which
Wow.
was to create our own businesses, right? So this
That's
happened.
that okay. Well, I'm just gonna stop you right there and just tell you how crazy that is and how amazing that both of you just decided to do that. And it's just I feel like it takes a lot of guts to do that. Like, wow, sir, that's amazing.
Felt like it was a time to take risk and make decisions.
Wow, was that scary at all? Like, were you guys scared, or was it just like,
I was kind of not scared from day one, simply because I had so much conviction. I was like, she's the one to do this with. She seems as excited as I am to do this. And it's like when you want to found a company or start something new, it's good to have at least one true fact. And as soon as you have that, I think you get bolder. You're willing to take more risks as long as there's at least one person that's by your side.
I completely agree with you. That's something that I hope will inspire a lot of listeners and viewers right now as well. So, where did you end up moving?
So we haven't fully moved here yet, but right now I am in Roatan, in Honduras. We're gonna buy an apartment here, a condo that is currently being built in the jurisdiction of Prospera. We're gonna be there probably 4 to 6 months out of the year. The rest of our time we probably spend in Mexico City, which is a place we love. But we're also gonna travel around more in Latin America, which is where I want to find and attract companies to the advantages we have here. We really like Guatemala. We really like Miami. We want to check out Puerto Rico. So we're going to stay part nomadic.
That's so cool. Um, you've mentioned Prospera, and you said that you started a VC fund in Honduras. Can you kind of connect those two factors together and let me know what is Prospera and how are you involved in that?
Yeah, sure. So again, going back to the two of us wanting to realize our dreams and take risks, like take the biggest possible swings we could possibly take. And I was thinking, what could that be? And initially I thought it would be in healthcare because it was COVID happening. We were all learning how many problems we have in our healthcare system. And my idea originally was to build like an open source platform for medical data. So researchers around the world, data scientists could work together on solutions using publicly available open source data sets. I think it's a neat thing. Some people are working on that, but I think there is a problem that we wouldn't be solving, which is the whole regulatory side, right? So it costs upwards of 1 billion to develop a new drug. It takes like 10 to 12 years, right? We were somewhat lucky developing the vaccines or getting them to market in 1 year, but it also could have been way faster, right? Because we had the technology to develop these vaccines within 1 weekend. The first Moderna vaccine was developed in January 2020, over 1
Wow.
weekend.
I didn't
Versus
know
below.
that. That's
Yeah, it's
ridiculous.
mind-blowing, right? So
Uh-huh.
that gave me the insight. There's so much technology out there that is not seeing the light of the day because of overregulation, because of bureaucracy, and because of red tape. And as soon as I heard about Prospera, I was like, that's the solution. So you have a different regulatory approach. It's not default no, you need to lobby us for years to get what you want. Instead, there's a so-called regulatory choice model. So you adopt the regulation of any country that fits you best. So for example, if the insurance regulation in Singapore works best for you or in Norway, you can do an insurance company and Prospera under that regulation. And you can even write your own regulation if you think you can put together a better regulatory framework from different countries around the world. So I was like, wow, we could realize all sorts of technology there that's hard or impossible to build elsewhere. And that's when I was like, I gotta check this out. This sounds too good to be true. And I came there and I was like, wow, you guys really exist. That was my first reaction. And it had
Well, that's a good sign.
Yeah, exactly. And it had a really world-class team. Eric Ryman and Gabriel Delgado, the two founders, are world-class entrepreneurs. And they have very thoroughly thought through how the regulatory and legal system would work. They have worked for years on getting sort of the political buy-in in Honduras, the regulatory approval to do what they set out to do. And they've already attracted a nascent community of other really great entrepreneurs that are setting up shop. So for example, there's a company here called Mini Circle, and its founder, Mick Davis, he's already funded by Peter Thiel and Sam Altman. And he's working on cutting edge. Yeah, exactly. He's working on cutting edge gene therapy that is sort of in the longevity space. So
you said gene therapy.
Exactly.
Like CRISPR stuff.
Yeah, but it's different than CRISPR. It's something that he says is even better. And he can develop it here together with a clinic that's approved by IRB, which is a regulatory body that can collect data that is auditable by the FDA, right? So they can do the clinical trials in Prospera for a fraction of the cost and already give their product to people, sell their products through medical tourism.
Hold on a second. I'm just going to stop you right. I know we're here to talk about network state, but it's actually so fascinating what you're saying right now. So you mentioned a regulatory body. Is that a regulatory body of Honduras that approves that? Okay, no. So yeah, go ahead.
No, so Prospera has full autonomy when it comes to legal and business law, when it comes to civil and business law, right? They don't have autonomy when it comes to criminal law, right? They're part of the sovereign country of Honduras, but they're allowed to make their own labor regulation, their own industry regulation, their own tax system, right?
But like, okay, so let me then try to I'm trying to understand this, like the actual juice about the whole thing. It's just like, so you cannot do clinical trials quickly in, let's say, countries like United States with like FDA approval. You have to go to all like how do you call them? 1, 2, 3 clinical trial. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. I actually used to work in clinical trial industry. I was a finance manager for a gastroenterology clinical trial side. Anyways, okay, and so that all a lot of bureaucracy takes a lot of time. So basically, you say like, you know what, I'm not gonna like do the whole trial in the United States jurisdiction. I'm gonna go to another country, and I'm gonna use the services of a company such as Prospera, which will give me a legal kind of like a foundation and basis to start the whole thing, start a clinical trial on like a legal basis within that country, any sort of countries, Honduras or anything else. And based on that, I will streamline my processes, and let's say I'll do trials in those countries. Am I so far on track here?
Yeah, just to caveat that, to get access to the market in the United States.
That was my next question. Yeah. So how do you do that?
Yeah, so you would have to then go to the FDA, right? So you're only solving sort of clinical stage 1 and earlier, right, which gives you more shots on goal, and you can get to do these trials quicker, and you save on a lot of application fees simply. So I don't know exactly how much it was, but there's like application fees of like 50,000 to 100,000. to just do some of these phase 1 clinical trials, right?
Phase 1, yeah.
Exactly. So for a startup, that's a lot of money.
All
So
right,
you get more shots on goal in the early stages, but for the later stages, you still need.
You go back to the US.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're basically developing the whole thing, you're building up the foundation, and you're going through the whole phase 1 of everything, and you're saving a bunch of money on the whole research. And doctors and like startup pharmaceutical companies and all of that, saving all that money by developing a stage 1 drug, a clinical trial somewhere in a developing world country. And then once they have a whole legal basis that is kind of like on point, going back to the FDA, United States jurisdiction, applying for the whole thing, United States says, okay, this looks good, this looks on par, everything is regulated, and we are okaying that. You can continue your work in the United States, and by that, by not doing your work in the United States or let's say Europe somewhere, but in South America or like any other country, you basically saved yourself a shitload of money, and you can now continue with your
Exactly.
venture.
And
Okay.
this is just one example or something that the first company is trying to do it that way that I think aligns very well with the crypto and blockchain movement, which is around building better legal and financial guardrails, right? So you basically have a decentralized way to make a currency, a decentralized way to eventually do clinical trials.
Which is
And
amazing, an amazing segue. So thank you for that.
mm-hmm.
I actually said at one point, and I was like, how do I implement a blockchain technology in a clinical trial? In a clinical trials itself, again, because I had some experience on that, and I physically reviewed like cases and patients charts and all of that. And I was like, how can I put that all on the blockchain, but at the same time not do it for the sake of hype, but for the sake of actual utility? And to be honest, maybe I'm not an engineer, so I couldn't like actually put my finger on that. But I actually reviewed a couple papers online. Like people do think about that, and they're trying to develop some things. But yeah, I still haven't found like an actual explanation. How can we utilize blockchain technology for clinical trial? What I'm thinking about is like patients' data, making sure that it's all decentralized, and but at the same time, I'm like, well, we can just create it like what you're trying to do, the global database for for pharmaceuticals. I know something like that's being done for brain. Anyways, I'm talking gibberish here. But
Patents.
Patents. Say more. Say more.
So I had someone on my podcast yesterday. His name is Sava Kedemenides. He's from crowdfundedcures.org, and he's developing a so-called IP NFT, right? So that together with a healthcare outcome-focused fund can basically fund clinical trials for right now generic drugs and sort of have the ownership of the patent on the blockchain, right? This way you can have a more liquid market for buying and selling shares in that legal construct, right? And this way it becomes easier to fund clinical trials outside of the traditional, the mainstream system.
That is just so fascinating. I definitely want to get back to that at some point and like research more. I feel like just the whole inability to replicate certain things in business itself through blockchain technology, like just the cryptographically like approved certificates or contracts, or in this case, IP, can definitely be beneficial. But since we're talking about this whole thing, the cryptography and blockchain and Prospera and you moving around the world and being a digital nomad, let's talk about crypto. Let's talk about network state, cryptocurrency, and Balaji Srinivasan. Um, how long have you been in crypto, and how did you find out about Balaji Srinivasan's book, The Network State?
To be honest, probably not for that long. I mean, I've tangentially followed it on the sidelines, but I didn't connect it yet to taking some of the big swings that I wanted to, right? I mean, in the end, we want to change the healthcare system. We want to change real estate. We want to change energy. We want to change education. How do you do that with blockchain technology? I kind of saw the potential there, but I found currencies, a somewhat interesting use case, but it didn't blow my mind. I also found NFTs, digital, which is currently used for digital arts. It's interesting, but it didn't blow my mind yet. Now, with sort of the legal base layer of society, right? Sort of, I see now where this is going. And I think through Balaji's book, that gave me sort of the final kick. Oh, now I'm getting it. Now I can connect sort of the possibilities of technology to creating that large scale disruption.
So I'm going to read you a definition, one of the definition of a network state as outlined in Srinivasan's book. This is a one sentence description, and I've read it before on my podcast, but I just want to, like, for the uninitiated to voice it, to basically put it out there so that everyone knows the context. And then we can continue this discussion. And so the quote goes as follows, and it's a definition of a network state. And I quote, "A network state is a social network with a moral innovation, a sense of national consciousness, a recognized founder, a capacity for collective action, an in-person level of civility, an integrated cryptocurrency, a consensual government limited by a social smart contract, an archipelago of crowd-funded physical territories, a virtual capital, and an on-chain consensus that proves a large enough population, income, and real estate footprint to attain a measure of diplomatic recognition." So kind of a wordy one. He sort of provides like a shorter ones and the longer ones. This one is kind of like goes towards like the end of this book after Balaji already talks about the whole premise of what is a nation state and all of that. And I'm not gonna get in to all of those definitions. For those who want to learn more about it, they should listen to your podcast on the network state and also just read the book itself. But with this definition, what do you think is the most important thing that you kind of gathered, this nugget of information that you kind of clicked with you and that you know inspired you to do something? And how do you start a network state in the current environment? So those are my first two questions, and then I just want to discuss one thing in particular with you, but we will go further into it.
Two particular ones stand out for me, probably for different reasons. One is the moral innovation, and the other one is the, I think something that you said about census and income and collecting that amount, that data. I think the last one is a bit simpler to answer because that's when it dawned to me to what's possible with blockchain, what Balaji calls on-chain truth, right? So you have one kind of ledger of transactions, you have one sort of layer of definitions. And so you can basically, you know, write a history that's not written by the winners. Right?
I was about to say that it was an interesting concept that he he kind of brought up this thought. It's not like a new thing or anything, but it is right. It's a saying: history is written by the winners, and he brings out a lot of examples of that. How do we trust the history? Well, we don't really know what happened. We just know of people who won something, what they told. So what would the history look like in a network state? Could you elaborate on that?
So the history would, not sure how to answer it. Can you specify the question or rephrase what you were thinking?
Yeah, let me I guess let me start this chain of thought. And for example, when we say, you know, a history, who is it written for, right? It's written by people who killed other people, and there's no one to say something against them. That's why they can say whatever they want. So everywhere that they're messed up, everywhere that they were immoral, unethical, cheating, maybe some bad things, evil things, they can cover up. And in your podcast, you brought up that example about, you know, the Stalin picture where they removed the guy from the picture just because they didn't like him, so they just removed him from the history. So a lot of things like that happened around the world, and Balaji in his book brings a lot of examples about that. In the cryptographic world, when we talk about, and the same true is with transactions, banking transactions, you know, money laundering and stuff like that. It also kind of like, when you launder money, you remove the history, right? You remove the history of the origin of the money. How I see on-chain events, it's simply something is being put on, the event is being put on the block as how it happened. And that pretty much is going to be the truth. But I'm struggling to like know how like different events such as historical events or factual events would be registered on the blockchain. I do understand the concept of like a ledger, right? The Bitcoin, like that's what it's being used right now. Bitcoin's history is the ledger of like money transfers, right? You send me this, I send you this money, you send me this Bitcoin, and all of that is on the ledger, and it's all decentralized, and you can never change it. What do we do like with that technology, but for like day-to-day life? How do we use it? That's what
Yeah, I get it. So to mention something before the whole blockchain on truth thing, I think the one thing that's so interesting about network states is that from day one, the first transaction is voluntary, right? So you're voluntarily opting in to a real social contract, right? So Prospera, for example, has an actual written social contract. You agree to these rules, to this charter, then you can become an e-resident or full resident of this place, right? And in political theory, there's something like social contract theory, where we're kind of assuming there's a social contract, which is why the state has the right to do certain things that we might not like. In reality, nobody has ever seen or signed a social contract, right? It's not been done voluntarily. Network states or charter cities, from day one, the first transaction, the opt-in is voluntary, right? And, in that contract, you basically specify certain rules, certain way of doing things. One network state might just fully have their own currency, and you can trade in that currency, and you have a ledger of transactions of what happened, and you have a certain class of events defined. It might be like a trade registry that says, oh, you provided that services to that person, and you were incorporated in this. So this could look like very dense in terms of the data and information that you collect on each other, or it could be more hands-off, right? So, hey, the government or the city operator or the network state founder operator is not responsible for these kinds of business transactions. We let private services do that, but we maintain kind of a registry of, I don't know, it could look, there's different ways how it could look like, right?
Yeah, and by no means I'm telling you invent a network state for me right now in 5 seconds. So obviously that's something that Balaji offers for everyone to sort of think about and try to come up with their own version of a network state. What comes to my mind is always this, and I discussed it before on my podcast, is like a day-to-day operations. Like, let's say you would like to open a company, or let's say you'd like to sell something or put something on the blockchain. But while you are a member of this network state and all those things, or let's say you have a dispute with the counterparty, like over some sort of a business transaction, and you would like to like review the chain of events that led to that, which is absolutely no hearsay. It's going to be all of my actions are on my blockchain, and all of your actions or the counterparty that I'm in conflict with is on their blockchain. And so based on that, there's truly a factual kind of a I would say a resolution that can take place based on some sort of let's say one commandment or any sort of rules and regulations. Anyway, so those are the kind of things that are very powerful, and they're very scary, because again, a network state is not being backed by violence, as in like an idea, right? It's being backed by voluntarily opting in or opting out. And that is why, but the whole power of that is that why there is no violence is because there's truth to that. There's no like I don't need to convince anyone that my ideas are better than yours, because my ideas are basically have a track record that is put on the blockchain, something like that. Anyways, this can be like go on for a long time. One thing I really wanted to talk to you about though is creating something in real world that you can claim ownership to while you are because of your membership of a network state. As in my example, I've mentioned the archipelago of like real land or like real estate. How do you see this happening? I feel like you guys in Honduras are doing something like that. You've mentioned that you're buying an apartment in the jurisdiction of Prospera, and then you've mentioned startup societies and how this can lead to it. Can you speak a little bit more on that and how this can relate to the network state?
Yeah. So how do you start a network state? I would say there are broadly two different models that my friend Zach Caceres has called the platform model and the product model, right? So when you read Balaji's book, that's something more like the product model for a network state. And when you read or when you go to the model that someone like Petri Friedman, or to some degree also Paul Romer, the originator of the idea of charter cities, have developed, that's more like a platform city, right? So Prospera, where I am, is more like a platform city. that means it's sort of the base layer of society. It provides laws, it provides land, it provides regulation, it provides governance services, and citizens, people kind of sit on top and do business and trade and transaction and things, right? Another examples would be Talent City in Nigeria, for example. The product model is more about sort of that moral innovation, right? So Balaji specifically says, what gives examples, what if you have like a keto cult, right? You have a group of people that can gather around this one idea, how to improve society. So we all go keto. So that network state is delivering more product around that key moral innovation. It kind of fills that gap that you have in your life, right? Around that one need or that one moral innovation. So I think these two other examples for this would be Afropolitan or City DAO or Kevin. I think these come close to that, right? So Afropolitan, for example, they are a digital African nation, right? So they have Africans from around the world, from Africa, but also those that live in other countries. And they're like, hey, our governments aren't providing the service for us that we need. So for example, if you have an African student in the Ukraine, that person can't emigrate to Europe, right? And nobody's helping. So if we had like a digital African nation with our ability to issue passports, for example, or have like a digital or eventually a physical embassy that could get that person or member out of it, that's kind of the dream or the aspiration, which I think is brilliant. And I think these two models, platform and products, can be complementary, right? There's not necessarily one or the other. We can speculate because these are very nascent developments, right? Which one is better for what purpose or how to sell. I think the key idea of the product model or Balaji's ambition with proposing that idea is to make it easier and cheaper to start, right? So the platform model kind of requires you to start with diplomatic recognition. It's almost the reverse of Balaji, right? So you first have a piece of land that government allows you to use. You have like special economic zone status on that piece of land, and then you can develop it around it. So the advantage is it starts from legitimacy. It starts with a certain level of economy, like Prospera. The disadvantage is it's more expensive. It requires real estate development. It requires years of diplomatic, of lobbying, of lobbying governments, right? And Balaji's products network states doesn't require them. You can start with almost no cost with this moral innovation, with a Discord server, and with basically starting a DAO.
So, okay, so let's do like a little mental exercise on starting a DAO or starting like, so here's my kind of like a fantasy. At the same time, it's not, it's already a written concept and a lot of people already know about this concept. Let's say we are, I'm not even gonna say a network state for now, because network state, again, like it's, even if we'll take Balaji's formula, it's like all the way to the diplomatic recognition and it's like way too far away. But let's say we have a startup society contained of like 10,000 Discord members, and we're all like, there is like an actual DAO that is created, and the DAO has its own kind of a tokenomics situation going on, and everyone, who wants to buy in, they need to buy a certain amount of tokens and all of that. And so the cash from that buy-in from all the users who would like to participate is being invested, let's say, into a actual real world acres of land, like several acres of land, somewhere in Latin America or Central Asia. How do you see this happening? Do you think that, I don't even know if this actually already happened or not, but wouldn't that be a cool idea? And doesn't that sound like something that would go along with the network state? Let's say they buy this land, they create a DAO, and the DAO has like a subsidiary, which would be like an actual like real world LLC that can be able to like get into the partnership to buy actual land as a legal entity of certain government. And then, but the whole LLC is being ruled by the DAO, which is being ruled by its internal policies that are being ruled by, let's say, like 90% consensus through token holders. Is that something that can be attainable right now, do you think? And I don't know, continue my thought. Like, what do you think about that? Because, yeah.
For sure. I mean, to some degree has already happened with City DAO, right? So City DAO has bought land in Wyoming. right? And in Wyoming, they recognize DAOs as a legal entity. I don't
Mhm.
know the specific details of that, but I think that's pretty much what they want to do.
So okay, so actually, like I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't heard. I knew that Wyoming is very, very like progressive on everything crypto related. So they actually bought a plot of land, you say?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And do you know how it's being operated?
I mean, the land itself is barren, right? It's somewhere in the mountains. So I
Right.
think it's more for the formal recognition, or it has some formal elements to it, that you have some
Mhm.
territory where you have some regulatory leeway, right? I don't
Mhm.
think they're building things on there yet. I might be wrong,
Mhm.
but I think it's just to, get recognition as a certain legal entity. Again, I'm not familiar with the details, but the
I'm gonna
point
research
is.
that.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
I'm
Yeah, but the
definitely going
point
to.
is exactly like you said. You start with a community, you start with a DAO, and you buy up real land in the real world.
Do you feel like there's money making? For example, let's say we have a startup society that aims to be a network state, and they're trying to generate certain benefits for their members of the startup society. Uh, you've mentioned that you are purchasing an apartment that is being built right now. Do you feel like it's possible to perhaps create an apartment building, or like say like there is an apartment building project, and the whole thing is being funded by the DAO members?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about that, that's not necessarily something that's yet that exciting, right? I mean, what would the difference be between a home ownership association or like a global hotel chain where you need to have a club membership to use it, right? It
Hmm.
gets interesting when you're really allowed to do your own governance, when you're to some degree allowed to create your own rules and have some degree of autonomy, right? I
Hmm.
mean, some of that you can already do, right? What's interesting about Prospera specifically, where I'm going to buy my apartment, is that they have that legal autonomy where they can make their own rules. So that allows you also to do a business and with new and different rules. And so far, Prospera is the only of its kind, the 0 to 1 case, really, where all of it is possible. Kind of the final status of a network state is already fulfilled, right?
Hmm.
So there's a couple of others that come close to it, but I think Prospera is a couple of years ahead. But it's like it sounds a bit incredible sometimes when I talk about it to people, and I didn't believe it when I heard the story. When I read about it, I read about Prospera on a Scott Alexander article. I realized really the extent to which what's happening here, how revolutionary it is when I came here, when I saw it for the first time, right? I mean, it's a beautiful island and they
Hmm.
have their own, it's called the Better Building. It's like a co-working space. There's a couple of model units that they built. And they also recently acquired the neighboring golf resort with a couple of villas, a 5-star restaurant and hotel, and has their own private beaches. Right. I'm right now hanging out in an office space in Pristine Bay, which is the neighboring golf resort that is owned by Prospera. Right. So
That's so interesting. How does the government of Honduras, and I think you touched on it at the beginning, that how do they recognize Prospera as, did they have to like amend their constitution to like say like, okay, this is it sort of like an autonomous republic of sorts? Like what are the checks and balances there, and how safe is Prospera from like, let's say there's someone who wants to like win elections in Honduras and like change that?
yeah, I mean, it requires a whole nother episode to talk about the full story. But the short version of it is Prosper has a similar status or comparable status to Hong Kong or Dubai, right? So they have autonomy when it comes to business and civil laws, but they don't have necessarily territorial sovereignty. They're part of the country of Honduras, right? Honduras, out of all places, developed the most innovative, the most broad-ranging possibilities for these special economic zones, right? Special economic zones exist all around the world. There's thousands of them, right? Shenzhen, China is another example. But Honduras specifically adopted legislation that gives you a very large degree of autonomy with a very specific set of checks and balances.
Niklas, thanks so much. I know that we are running out of time, and if there's one thing that I've learned from this podcast is that the network state and startup societies, it's not necessarily about real estate or buildings, real estate or land. It's more about what are your rights as an organization? What is your legal entity status, and what can you achieve with that for the betterment of humanity? Niklas, thanks so much. How can people find you and your organization?
Well, in the podcast program where you're listening this, you can type in Stranded Technologies Podcast, where you please follow my podcast. I interview interesting guests that talk about the company-specific industries like healthcare, like education, like finance, and talk specifically about interesting insights on how better legal or regulatory frameworks, how they impact business and innovation specifically. And also you can find me on Twitter, Niklas Anzinger, or go to infinitafunds.com. That's like infinity, just with an A instead of a Y, and fund.com, and join my Discord community.
I will post all those links that you mentioned in the description of my podcast. Niklas, thank you so much for being a guest on the pod. I hope you will come back to talk more about network state. And we're only in the beginning of this whole revolution worldwide. And I'm very excited to see more to come. Thank you, sir.
It's great fun. Thanks.